Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this Field Advisor webinar, Pest and Disease Watch, what to look for based on survey data. My name is Kelsey Litchfield. I'm the Agronomic Outreach Manager with Illinois Soybean Association. And I'm excited to welcome you to today's webinar, introduce Kelly and Ahmad. But first, I have a couple quick housekeeping items before we jump into the webinar. So the webinar will be recorded and will be available after the live session in case you want to revisit anything that our presenters shared today. It will also be emailed out along with a survey, and then it will contain the link to watch on Field Advisor's YouTube channel and our website. And also one CEU credit in pest management. Pest management is available. So if you're watching this live, we will share a QR code after the presentation, which you can scan. And if you're watching the recording of this webinar, we recommend self-reporting for the CEU credit. You can email fieldadvisor@ilsoy.org if you need any assistance. Also, of course, questions are welcomed. Our presenters will start with their own presentations, and then we'll have a Q&A discussion at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, put them into the Q&A feature. I told the presenters are more than welcome. They see that question right away and they want to address it, or we can wait till the end and address it then as well. And thank you to those who submitted their questions in advance. We have those as well and shared those with the presenters. So let's go ahead and meet our panelists for today, or rather our speakers for today. Kelly Estes is an entomologist at the University of Illinois, where her role is the state survey coordinator of the Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey Program. She coordinates surveys for invasive insects, pathogens, and weeds that are a threat to Illinois agriculture, forestry, horticulture, and the environment. She works with the Illinois Department of Agriculture along with industry stakeholders, extension, and many others. And in addition to coordinating surveys and managing the data associated with them, she helps develop public information and education material for these invasive pests. So if you don't follow her on Twitter or X, I highly recommend doing so. And then our second presenter today is Dr. Ahmad Fakhoury. He's a professor at Southern Illinois University, so great to have Southern Illinois on us as well today. And Dr. Fakhoury specializes in crop, soil, and environmental management. At Southern, he teaches courses such as field crop diseases, field crop protection, and biology of plant microbe interactions. He holds a PhD in botany and plant pathology from Purdue University, as well as a master's in plant protection and a bachelor's in agriculture from the American University of Beirut. All right, I will first hand it over to Kelly, and then Ahmad, I'll have you follow up. But for now, here is Kelly Estes.
Thanks for having me today. Let's see if I can pass the first test. Did my screen share correctly? Yes? All right. Perfect. Thanks again for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with everyone and just discuss a few things that are going on in the field across Illinois this growing season. And like Kelsey said, I am a survey coordinator. While I do a lot of invasive species surveys with the Department of Ag and USDA, field crop entomology is my background. I also do a lot of field crop survey work as well with the Department of Crop Sciences here at the University of Illinois, along with coordinating insect trapping efforts throughout the growing season as well. So let's get started. When I was first approached to share some early season pest info, I thought to myself, there's so many things that are going to be going on this time of year. This is going to be so great. We have so much to discuss. And then I read the fine print that said 20 minutes. Yikes. So we're going to try to squeeze in some information as best I can. When I think early season pests, I think about grubs and slugs and seed corn maggots, wireworms and rootworms, cutworms, bean leaf beetles, armyworm. The list just can go on and on. And I know some of the promotional material also said we're going to base some of this discussion on survey data, but we're kind of really early into the growing season. So we don't have a lot of surveys that have been concluded yet in 2025. We're just starting surveys this week. My interns are out and about the past 2 weeks getting traps going. And honestly, there's not a lot to share yet, but we're going to utilize some data from last year, and we're going to balance it out with some trapping information from this past spring, and then some field observations that we've gotten in thus far. When I think of early season, I think of emergence through V6, V8. We're out checking fields to see what's going on. And when I say checking fields, we're not doing flybys. You know, I grew up with one. Dave Cook, if you're on today, I apologize for throwing you under the bus, but drive-by scouting is probably not going to work as well with early emergence scouting. We really need to channel our inner CSI detectives. We need to be observant what's going on in the field, looking to see if there's anything that looks different. We're checking plant health, looking for stunting, discoloration, wilting. We're looking at stand counts. Are we missing plants? Are there cut plants? And then as the season progresses, we're looking, you know, defoliation. What kind of defoliation? Or loss of leaf tissue? Is there feeding on the stems? And not just 50 feet in from the gate entrance. We're looking throughout the field. Issues may or may not be localized to one spot, and this is especially true with insects. And insect infestations may or may not be field wide. They can be along field edges. They can be in certain spots of the field. So, excuse me. So it's really good to get a good look over the entire field. And with that, I'd also say, you know, it is good to know what's going on in general in the area. And one of the things we try to provide is what's going on with insect activity in the state of Illinois. And so that kind of helps provide some first warning for growers as they're out checking their fields. So with this, let's start with like some soil dwelling pests, and seed corn maggots and wireworms, grubs come to mind immediately. And honestly, we don't see a lot of widespread issues with wireworms or seed corn maggots. They both tunnel in the seed. They feed on cotyledons and the hypocotyl. They can cause stunting, wilting, gaps in plant stands. And like I said, we don't really see widespread issues with them. And what we do hear more about is issues with grubs. And these are also pests that can cause very similar injury. And they're also more apt to damage poorly or slowly growing soybeans. We also see them in corn. And when we say grubs, actually, there's several different species that can be present in a field. You have your white grubs, the European chafer. We have Japanese beetles, June beetles, mass chafer, and also the Asiatic garden beetle. In general, we can look at grubs and see that they are white, they are C-shaped, they generally have orange-brown heads, and while they are similar in appearance, what we want to look at is their raster pattern, or the hairs on their butt. Yes, one of the big things you take from Entomology 101 is that you identify grubs by looking at the hairs on their butt. And so you have a good hand lens, microscope is what I use, but we can look at and get a closer look at what's going on in your field by identifying what kind of grub is feeding on those plants. You know, one of the probably biggest issues with grubs is Japanese beetles. They're widely prevalent throughout the state, and we deal with them on a regular basis, and we can count on them year after year. Asiatic garden beetles, as noted here on this slide, is a pest that's garnished some attention over the past few years, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. Both of them can feed on leaves of corn and soybeans, but most of the other adults of those white grubs are going to feed very little or not at all. Japanese beetle is something that we, like I said, count on year after year. It's something that we pay attention to, and what we're looking for most of the time is when are Japanese beetles going to emerge. If you remember, they overwinter as late instar larvae in the soil, and they complete their life cycle here in early spring, and then they start emerge in early summer. And we used to place out traps looking for those first Japanese beetles when they started to emerge. And for those of you that have been agronomists or been around for a while, you may remember Ron Hines with the University of Illinois down in Southern Illinois. We would use these traps. And the thing with Japanese beetle traps is the pheromone is a congregation or a combination of a congregation and a mating pheromone. So if you notice, when we see one Japanese beetle, we see like 100. And that's the case with trapping too. The traps would fill within hours, and he would over time come up with, he attached a 5-gallon bucket, and then he's attaching garbage bags. And so there's nothing worse than counting a garbage bag full of Japanese beetles. And luckily, we don't necessarily have to trap to determine emergence anymore, but we can also use degree days. And we use our degree days here with the warm weather and atmospheric resources here at the University of Illinois. They have a pestery calculator, and with that, shown here on the slide, shows us a current map of accumulated degree days. And we know that adult emergence of Japanese beetles occurs about after the accumulation of just over 1,000 to 2,000 degree days. If you look at the map, we see that we are quickly approaching and reaching some of that in Southern Illinois. So based on degree days, we would assume that we could start seeing Japanese beetles here in the very near future. I know also when I'm out and about, I can utilize things such as roses, also grapes in my yard, and even some of the berries will be some of the first plants that Japanese beetles will show up on after they begin emerging. So it's nice that we can have multiple ways to help us predict when Japanese beetles are starting to emerge. As promised, Asiatic garden beetle. Now, historically, this was a very sporadic pest, but over the past few years, we're starting to hear more and more reports in both corn and soybeans. We believe it is present in Illinois, potentially widespread. It is not something that we've trapped, and I'll get to some of that reasons why here in a few minutes. But just like Japanese beetles, the grubs will feed on roots. They cause stunting, discoloration. On the flip side, adults can strip foliage, and unlike Japanese beetles who skeletonize leaves. So but very different ways of injuring plants. So a very ragged edge versus skeletonization of leaves. We are more likely to find them in sandy, gravelly soils, very light colored soils. And you're also more prevalent to find them in corn following soybeans. Different research has shown that the more likely to lay their eggs in soybeans. And one of the reasons we have trouble determining where they're at is that Asiatic garden beetles are active and they fly at night. And this is also the opposite of Japanese beetles. Japanese beetles are active during the day. When we're out in soybean fields, they're readily seen, they're moving, they're flying, easy to monitor, whether visually or using sweep nets. And during the day with Asiatic garden beetles, they're more than likely at the base of the plant, potentially right under soil like clods or in the very top levels of the soil. One of the ways we've been measuring Japanese beetles is through sweep samples, and each year we do a statewide survey, and we sample 40 to 50 counties around the state, 5 stops in each county. We're doing sweeps in soybeans. We're also doing visual counts of rootworms in corn. And so over time, we know that Japanese beetle populations fluctuate. They tend to follow a bell curve where they slowly build, and then we'll see a crash. And while I'm only showing the most recent 4 years here, we do have longer data sets that we do see that. But overall, the past few years, we've tended to see higher Japanese beetle populations in the northwest, the west part of the state, although we have noticed some slow building down towards the south and southwest areas, things like, or places like Sangamon, Christian, Macon, not Macon, sorry, Macoupin counties. It's also very sporadic. These we can have locations within counties with very high counts, and then also fields where we get virtually nothing. And one of the things about this survey is that we don't have management history on these fields. They're randomly selected, and we stop every 5-10 miles and select a location. And so we can be out in a field doing sweeps, and as you're sweeping, you're realizing this field has been sprayed because there's nothing in there. So it is luck of the draw on what we may or may not find. But I do think this gives us a good indication of where some of the higher populations of Japanese beetles are in the state. And we can use this going into the next growing season. That, along with observations of your own in the area, can help determine where you might see bigger Japanese beetle potential for injury the following growing season. Another pest that we regularly monitor is western corn rootworm, and this is no stranger to Illinois growers. We know that the larvae feed on roots. The adults can cause silk clipping, just like Japanese beetles. There is potential for leaf feeding by adults, but it rarely causes injury. And this is the time of year when eggs begin to hatch. And like Japanese beetles, we can use degree days to help us predict when egg hatch occurs. But also we've, very recently, people have mentioned different phenology indicators as well. And I know one of the questions that was pre-submitted was they wanted to talk about lightning bugs. And so, and it's not just lightning bugs. 2 weeks ago, I had a friend in Southern Indiana let me know that she had seen her first lightning bugs. I was like, okay, it's starting to get warm. Should be starting to see them here in Illinois soon. Last week at the state track meet, I saw, I was inundated with cottonwood tree, the fluff that's blowing around. That's another good phenology indicator of rootworm hatch. But like I said, we can also use degree days, and we're looking at accumulation of degree days based on soil temperature for those eggs. And so this was our degree day accumulations as of yesterday. And we know when we reach about 680 to 767 degree days, those are very specific numbers, but about 50% of the hatches occurred. So we are approaching or have reached those levels in much of the state. And I would expect over the next 2 weeks, the rest of the weather stations will show us very similar numbers or accumulations as well. You know, the question that comes up each year is, what is the threat of rootworms? And we talk regularly about winter temps and winter conditions, how they play a factor with those eggs that are overwintering. But, you know, soil conditions during the spring also play a factor. When we have very wet, soggy soils, I can hear Mike Gray speak this, and he said it over and over again. Rootworm larvae cannot swim, so there's not enough air in there, and that will also play an effect, or can affect the population as well. But if we look at some of our survey results from last year. Overall, rootworm populations have been low over the past few years. What we have here is rootworms that were present in soybeans. So 100 sweeps per field, and then we have crop district averages as well as a state average. We saw higher levels of rootworms in soybeans in both the northeast and western part of the state this last year. In fact, if I'm remembering correctly, Kane County, LaSalle County, and then Warren and McDonough counties were some of our highest counts of rootworms in soybeans. But we're not just looking at soybeans, we're looking at, well, what are we finding in cornfields? And this gives a better indication of those numbers over time. These are per plant counts. So we're also looking at cornfields when we make those stops, and we're looking and counting the number of rootworms, western corn rootworms per plant. You'll notice there is a star in 2024. My interns did count particularly, and this is evident in counts of the Northwest. Those are not just western corn rootworms. Those also included some northern corn rootworms. The numbers were so high in the northwest part of the state, and as they were moving through counting on those 25 plants, it was hard to keep track of rootworms flying from plant to plant. Was it a western? Was it a northern? But we do know that those counts were so very high, particularly in Carroll and Ogle County, where we do see higher populations of northerns. There's a lot of corn after corn in that area. But we also saw similar counts in the western part of the state. Once again, Warren and McDonough counties had a little bit higher. But overall, we see, particularly from a statewide average, counts are very low. We would consider rootworm populations to be overall low across the state. And once again, there are pockets within the state where rootworm pressure is a little bit higher. I know my time is winding down and I've been talking in my mind, I feel, very quickly, but there's several other insects that could be a factor in the coming weeks as we transition into June. Stink bugs, bean leaf beetle, armyworm, not only in corn and soybeans, but also wheat. We've been trapping for armyworm over the past couple months, and overall flights have been lower than past years, but they have been occurring. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't see armyworm injury this season, but it is still something we would look out for. European corn borer, and I know why it's not widely prevalent. We do see issues pop up in areas of the state where more non-GMO corn is being grown. So that's another one I still think, even though we're not catching it in traps, it is still out there. This past week, slugs have been on my mind with as wet as it's been in Southern Illinois with the repeated rains, especially in some areas where planting is delayed or there's going to need to be replant. But I do think the forecasted high temperatures arriving next week may in fact help in that regard, as slugs tend to prefer cool and wet conditions. And then I'm going to end with black cutworm. This is something that we've been monitoring the past 2 months as well. I coordinate a trapping program through a USDA grant with the Department of Crop Sciences. And we monitor cutworm, armyworm in the spring. Those are migratory insects that are moving from the south. And then we transition to earworm, corn borer, and fall armyworm during the summer. We use those traps to help determine, one, when flights are occurring, and two, when we reach significant flights in an area. Because when we reach significant flights in an area, we can then use degree days to help predict when potential cutting is going to be occurring in an area. Our volunteer cooperators report their counts either to me or directly to the website, and we are lucky enough to be partnered with the Corn IPM Pipe website, where you can go and see up-to-date maps of what's going on with those insects throughout the growing season. With black cutworm, we've had significant flights occurring for several weeks across the state. The dates on the map here show the earliest potential cutting based on significant flights. So throughout much of the state, we are at the point where we could be seeing cutworm larvae big enough to cut plants. But that is just an indicator. You can go a little bit before or a little bit after that too. It's just a good warning system, if you will. But we've also still had flights occurring just this past week. So I look at Southern Illinois, down at Ewing, the research center there has been monitoring traps, and they had another significant flight recently, and they can probably expect cutting to be occurring through the beginning of June in Southern Illinois. Like I said, cutworm larvae are now large enough to do more than just pinhole feeding. So early instar larvae have very small potential injury. Pinhole feeding along the edge of the leaves. And as they get bigger, they are going to have the potential to cut. We're more likely to see injury in fields that are later planted, have late tillage, or even that had a lot of early season weeds. And just as a reminder, plants are more susceptible from emergence through V4 with black cutworm. And like I said, we can expect potential issues with cutworm probably through the beginning of June throughout much of the state. And so with that, thanks. I look forward to answering any questions that anybody might have.
Thanks, Kelly. We will head now on to Dr. Fakhoury, but if Kelly said something or you're like, oh, I have this question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and we'll get to it after Dr. Fakhoury's presentation. So I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Let me see if I can share. Okay, can you see my?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for making it to this to the webinar, and thank you very much for the opportunity. So I'm going to be talking about some early season diseases that we see in this area. So starting with some number, and this is from the Crop Protection Network, and this is a survey that was done in 2024 across the United States and the main soybean producing areas, states in the country, and the estimate was around a little bit over 260 million bushels of soybean yield reduction that can be attributed to diseases. So looking a little bit closer into some of the main culprits, the main pathogens that are responsible for the majority of these losses. So soybean cyst nematode ranked first, followed by sudden death syndrome. Seedling diseases and Phytophthora root and stem rot also seem to have caused significant damage in 2024. So just to kind of, if I have to make a recommendation in terms of a reference, I have a couple of recommendations. That this booklet here, Soybean Diseases, A Farmer's Guide to Soybean Diseases, I think it's a very nice tool and resource. It is an American Phytopathological Society publication. So I do highly recommend it. And I think I checked the price on Amazon yesterday, $35. So it's a steal. And then you don't panic. There are only 2 left in stock, but don't panic. More are on the way, and if you're into a Kindle thing, so you can download it. But But also an awesome resource, I think, is the Crop Protection Network, and this is the link. And it is a very nice resource. It's a collaborative effort amongst several land-grant universities, researchers from land-grant universities, and you can find all types of resources, tools, webinars, up-to-date information in terms of diseases, not only in soybean and corn, but some other crops too. So that said, I was asked to talk about some of the early season diseases that we would expect in soybean. And when we talk about early season, we're talking about the maybe VE to V4, V5. So this is kind of this table kind of shows you some of the main pathogens that usually are reported during between VE and V4, V5. Now V5 till R1, this is like early mid-season. I'm going to be talking about some of the diseases that we would expect during that period too. But anyway, some of the diseases, not all of these diseases are important in terms of the damage that they cause, especially in our area. I'm going to be talking about some foliar diseases like some septoria, but I'm going to talk a lot about some root diseases, mainly Fusarium root rot and wilt, Phytophthora, Pythium, Rhizoctonia, soybean cyst nematode, sudden death syndrome, of course. And I'm going to talk a tiny bit about red crown rot towards the end if I have time. So in terms of scouting, just kind of some brief notes here. So in terms of seedling diseases, usually the seedling diseases are, for the most part, there are some exceptions that are associated with, they like cold soil temperatures, conditions, and then also some wet soils, right? So usually they're associated with mineral tillage, and they're also associated with early planting. So where they appear first is going to be in the low-lying areas in your field, any wet spots in your field. And then in terms of the symptomology, so of course they can affect the seedlings. So you can have dead seedlings, right? So post or pre-emergence damping offs. But you can also, if the plant kind of survives that period, you can also see some wilting, and you can see some foliar symptoms. Now. The seedlings pathogens that affect the roots. So you have root rotting that's usually often associated with these diseases. There are certain, we're going to talk about some of the main pathogens and maybe some of the distinctive features of the symptoms they cause on the roots. But despite that, usually it's pretty hard to really definitely determine what pathogen you have. So it's always recommended to send some samples to your clinic where they can, in a lab setting, can look and determine what species are there. Now, in terms of the foliar and stem diseases, so usually most of the scouting takes place later in the season. So we're talking R1 and beyond. Septoria brown spot. And this is it's a fungal pathogen. It's caused by this fungus, Septoria glycines, and it doesn't really, in our area at least. When I say area, I'm talking about the Midwest and North Central region of the United States. So usually, it's not doesn't really cause that many losses. But in terms of yield, but this is the first. Some of you may have start to see some of these symptoms. This is one of the first pathogens to appear in a field. So it appears very, very early on the unifoliate of the bean. You see these small lesions, purplish. They turn yellow. And then once again, I mean, this is not one of the diseases that we are too much terribly worried about. But then there are some instances where if it starts very early and it does, and if it takes off, it's favored by high temperature and rainy weather. So if you have substantial kind of infestation during pod filling, so that the yield may be affected. So in terms of management strategies, rotation with non-host crops is usually works. Although it's a septoria, it's a different species than the septoria, the pathogen, the spore pathogen causes that's problematic on wheat. And then there's fungicides are available, but usually rarely recommended for this particular disease. Fusarium root rot and wilt. So here we're talking about several species of Fusaria that can cause these problems. So these are soil-borne pathogens. They are in your soil, and they affect the roots. And you see, usually they cause substantial damage on the roots. So if you root some of the plants, you see some symptoms, some poor growth, poor plant development. You uproot some of these plants, and you look at the root system. You see this extensive damage on the root system. Usually, you do not see, as opposed to some other diseases I'm going to talk about later on, that those symptoms are you don't see any symptoms on the stems. So those symptoms are restricted to the root system. You see rot, you see ill-developed root system. So in terms of management practices, you want to, there is an association between some of these Fusarium species and damage caused by SCN. So using cultivars that are resistant to SCN helps. There are some seed treatments that are available. Unfortunately, because there are so many species, sometimes these fungicides or these seed treatments can be selective. They can be more efficacious against some species of Fusaria compared to others. But seed treatments are usually recommended for these pathogens. Phytophthora sojei has a big problem. It is associated with usually with, once again, low-lying areas of the field. It is really not a fungus. So Phytophthora and the organism I'm going to talk about next, Pythium, these are kind of, they look like fungi, they act like fungi, but they're really not fungi. They're oomycetes. So in this case, what you're going to see, you can see pre and post emergence damping offs. You can see some seedling blight. And one big differentiating factor between this pathogen and Fusaria in terms of symptomology, what you are going to see is you will see some symptomology. You're going to see some necroses. You're going to see some symptoms on the lower stems. Okay. So looking at the stems, you can see that those necrotic tissues, and then also some of the symptoms that are associated with this wilting of the leaves, and then they droop and they stay attached to the plant. But in terms of the losses that are caused by this pathogen in the north central region, so it's kind of estimated. Last year, this is I had almost $3 per acre. Now the favorable conditions. So once again, poorly drained soil. So often it does occur in low-lying areas of the field that are prone to flooding. And then as far as management goes, there's some resistance out there, but there's so much diversity, and the population of this pathogen are evolving so quickly that some of those RPS genes are losing some of their effectiveness. seed treatments are available, but we said that with Phytophthora and Pythium, so these guys are really not fungi. So you want to make sure that whatever fungicide that you're using seed treatment is labeled for Pythium and for Phytophthora. Some of the fungicides that work, the seed treatments that work for Fusarium, they do not work for Phytophthora and for Pythium. Pythium, also here we see there are several species that are associated with Pythium seedling blight on soybean. And then one kind of characteristic about this in terms of symptomology about this pathogen is the type of rot that causes. So you see these water-soaked lesions. It's like a wet trot, right? It's not like it's a soft trot. It's a wet trot, as opposed to the types of rots that you see with Fusarium that are more like dry rots. So it's for the most part, cooler soil temperatures at planting favor the development of the disease. There are some exceptions, but once again, because there are so many several species of Pythium that are associated with this disease. And then seed treatments are available, but also, like with the Phytophthora, you just want to make sure that those seed treatments those fungicides are labeled for Pythium, for oomycetes. Rhizoctonia is an important pathogen, is a big one. And then in this case, same thing. I mean, you see your pre and post emergence damping offs. But with this particular pathogen, you see this reddish kind of sunken lesions on the hypocotyle, and those are very distinctive. Those are very diagnostic of this particular pathogen, Rhizoctonia solani. So in terms of favorable conditions, the symptoms may be more severe in fields with light and then sandy soils. And it does have a wide host range, Rhizoctonia solani. So in this case, crop rotation is not effective. And it has been reported that the problem with Rhizoctonia can be even more serious when you have double crop soybean, like after wheat. So that can be a problem with Rhizoctonia solani. But seed treatments are available for this particular pathogen. Sudden death syndrome, if you remember, it ranked second amongst the pathogens that are associated in terms of importance nationwide regarding the losses that are incurred by this pathogen. The typical symptoms, you have that foliar scorch. So you have that intervenor chlorosis that develops into a necrosis. But one should not forget that there are really two phases of this particular pathogen. So you have the root rot and the foliar scorch, and both of these can cause loss yield in yield. And then there are certain instances where you can see the root rot without actually seeing the foliar symptoms. Depending on where you are, so in the southern parts of the state, you would see those foliar symptoms early in the V stages. In a lot of instances, the plant will kind of recover. You won't see those symptoms, but then they might, depending on the conditions during the R1, R2 stages, if you have conditions that are conducive for the development of this disease, you may see those symptoms reappearing later on in the season, and that can. But at least in the southern parts of the state, you can, in southern Illinois, you can see symptoms very early on, and you can see the symptoms in the V stages. It's a soil-borne pathogen. It is in the soil, even if you don't see the symptoms. It's in your soil, and it's jumping on me. And this is what it looks like. These are the spores that are produced by this pathogen. And some so once again, it affects the root system and a kind of a diagnostic sign. So it's like the actual pathogen. If you uproot in certain instances, and if you're lucky, you uproot that root, those infected roots, and you see that bluish kind of discoloration that is associated with this. Just a very distinctive kind of a feature of this particular pathogen, that blue discoloration growth on the infected or the infested roots. So in 2024, losses per acre in the north central region of the United States that are associated with this pathogen amounted to almost $5. The environmental conditions that are conducive for the production of this, for the development of this disease, usually it's associated with early planted fields, compacted soils, and high moisture, low soil temperature during vegetative growth, and then the cool period during flowering. And that has been an association between this disease and sorghum cyst nematode. So the disease, you can have SDS without SCN, but in the presence of SCN, yes, SCN is because of the stress on the plant, because the SCN it causes injury on the plant, provides like points of entry for this pathogen, so you can have an exacerbation of the problem. There are several, in terms of management, there are several seed treatments that are available that are efficacious against this, against Fusarium virgidiforme, against this pathogen. Soybean cyst nematode, Heterodora glycine, that's the #1 pest in soybean. Usually the symptoms, they really like kind of to be able to really determine that you have SCN, you need to uproot look at the roots, and you see these small kind of whitish at the beginning. So that's the female, those cysts. So early in the season, you start seeing these maybe like a month and a half after planting in infested fields. And so these are the females that form these cysts, and then these cysts later on they will be engorged with eggs, right? And they go to the soil, and that's how that fungus, not the fungus, the nematode, how the eggs survive in the soil. Later on in the season, these white cysts turn more like yellowish, brownish. So they become a little bit harder to discern. But some of the symptoms you'll see chlorosis, you'll see stunting, you'll see delayed or reduced canopy closure. All of these are indicative of SCN. Now, SCN is in every soil in Illinois. It's widespread. It's all over the place. And this is in 2024, so almost $12. This is the estimated loss per acre. So $12 per acre estimated loss that can be attributed to SCN. Favorable conditions, high pH soils, dry soil conditions, sandy soils, all of these do promote SCN. Management, resistance, and there are some seed treatments that you want to have a combination of all of these to reduce the populations of the nematode in your feed.
I was going to say, apologies to interrupt. We got a couple more seconds and we'll have to go into our Q&A, but you're about to hit on a very...
Red crown rot, yeah, that's the... So here I'm cheating a tiny bit because really the symptoms are, you see them later on in the growing season. But this is one of those diseases that was first reported in Illinois in 2018, 2019. It's associated with higher temperatures. It has always been a disease. It has been a problem, not a problem, but it was reported in the South long time ago, like on soybean, and still a pathogen on peanuts. But in Illinois, the first time it was reported on soybean was in 2018, I believe. That's a soil-borne pathogen. And since then, I think this is a pretty recent data. And then you can see here in Illinois, now we see it in Illinois. So initially, it was pretty, so it's like 2018, 2019. It was reported in the western part of the state, and then lately it has recent surveys have shown that it has spread throughout the state. And now this is kind of here. All of this means that in these different counties, some samples did show the incidence, the presence of this of this pathogen. It doesn't mean that the intensity is the same across. So some areas still have more red crown rot than other areas. But anyways, in terms of symptomology, very early on, you may be able to see that red discoloration in the early stages. Was very hard. If you have a field where you have a history of red crown rot, you know that there's red crown rot. You go and you look very closely, and then you may be able to see that red discoloration on the lower stem. Later on in the season, if you are lucky, you'll be able to see those fruiting structures that are very diagnostic for this particular pathogen. Only this pathogen produces these, but you don't always see them, and then you have to see them towards the end of the season. It does also have some foliar symptoms, and these foliar symptoms can very well be mistaken for some other diseases, including SDS. They look like kind of similar, but once again, you can have that. If you can see that red discoloration, that would be indicative of the lower stem, that would be indicative of this pathogen. That there are, I believe, some promising seed treatments, fungicides that then target this pathogen. With that, I thank you very much, and I'm going to share these two publications from the Crop Protection Network with you for fungicides. With that said, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fakhoury. Yes, Crop Protection Network. If you've never visited that website, it's a wealth of knowledge, a great partner with us. So he'll send over those links. But before everyone goes, we do have a couple questions that I want to present to both Kelly and Dr. Fakhoury. So Kelly, real quick, someone asked, are early or late planted cornfields more at risk for cutworm damage?
Late. Late planted is more susceptible. And if early flew out of my mouth, I'm so sorry.
Good correction. Thank you. I know you talked about the Asiatic beetle. Did you talk about how best ways to control that and the larvae on feeding on seedlings?
No, it was not in my mind to do that, but there really isn't any rescue treatment. So we're looking at things like seed treatments and soil insecticide at planting would probably be your best bet to keep those under control. And like I said, it isn't something that we know that there are heavy populations in certain areas of the state that are consistently causing injury. And if you do believe there is something like that occurring in your fields, we would like to know. We know they're present. They feed on many different host plants. So this came across my desk probably 10 years ago as a potential invasive issue becoming more evident in Illinois, more in urban areas on ornamental plants. And now we are seeing it very sporadically in our agronomic settings as well.
Thank you. Dr. Fakhoury, do you deal with anything with wheat? We've had a couple wheat questions about.
Yeah, there was a question about head blight on wheat.
So talk about the wheat scab.
Yeah, exactly right. So scab on wheat. So yeah, usually we do not. So the question was whether we spray when we start to see symptoms or before seeing symptoms. So usually we do spray before seeing the symptoms. Once you see the symptoms, it's kind of too late. So usually it's like the mid flowering, so like Feeks 10.5 or for 5.1, this is when it's recommended to spray for the pathogen.
One last question I have for you, Dr. Fakhoury. What are the main types of epidemiological models used in plant pathology? Seems like a very technical question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it all depends on the pathogen, right? So I guess the question was it you look at the like polycyclical, monocyclical. So it all depends on the pathogen. So some pathogens will have, like, if you're looking at an SDS, so it's just one cycle per growing season, or like a macrophomina, right, chaco rot, or what have you. But then you have some other pathogens like frogeye leaf spot, right, where you can have different cycles, right, during the same growing season. So it all depends on the pathogen.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Do either one of you want any last word or anything that you forgot to mention? Kelly, I'll start with you as we wrap things up.
Nothing that immediately comes to mind. I did cover a whole lot of information in a short time frame. So if anybody has questions, they are sure welcome to reach out to me directly. We try to get information out in lots of different ways. You mentioned X, and there's also through the University of Illinois Extension and the Crop Development Bulletin. If you are seeing things in your field, as I just mentioned, we would love to hear about it. One of the best ways we can know more is to hear more. And so, you see a lot on social media, but we always enjoy hearing from growers and what they're finding in their fields as well.
Pretty easy. Just Google Kelly Estes and you can find, or like I said, X or Twitter is a good way to connect with her. Dr. Fakhoury, anything else? Lots of
No, thank you for the opportunity. And if you have any questions, please do reach out. And good luck with the season.
Yeah. Stephanie, you have a question.
Wondering, excuse me, Dr. Fakhoury, if you could touch on maybe, I know you're working on a lot of different ISA funded projects, but the one that maybe is pertains to disease survey work, if you just want to touch on that a little bit and maybe when you might have some results.
Yeah, so we're wrapping up that particular project. Hopefully, we will be having some results some finalized results very soon. And that mainly we were looking at stem diseases, right? And then so they do not fall within the early season pathogens. So yeah, so we're wrapping up that project hopefully, and we did go through a couple of surveys to look at what the concerns are in terms of, and the perceptions in terms of the pathogens cause stem diseases. And then we also received a lot of, so thank you very much for everybody who sent us samples. We got some seed samples, we got some disease plants like stems to kind of look at what organisms. So usually the organisms that fall within this, you have mainly your diaporte, and you have a little bit of the canker-causing pathogen too, some Cordytotricum, but a lot of diaporte, different species of diaporte, and then hopefully we're finalizing this and we'll be able to report that soon.
Yeah. And we'll be posting more information about that project on Field Advisor. So I'm glad Stephanie mentioned it. We have some information from that soybean stem pest research. So if you're subscribed to Field Advisor, I'll put a plug in. It'll be in our e-newsletter soon. If you haven't subscribed, I recommend you go to fieldadvisor.org and you could read much more about all of our ISA checkoff funded research. So with that, I want to thank again Dr. Fakhoury, Kelly Estes for being on today. There's a lot of disease insects to be aware of. I think they did a great job of giving us the whole picture. So now it's kind of like we'll see what the rest of the growing season brings, and I know they're a great resource to have. So, and they welcome you contacting them if you have any questions or follow-up. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone that attended. We appreciate your attendance on our Field Advisor webinar. Just a quick reminder, the QR code's on the slideshow right there. If you are a CCA, go ahead and scan that. If you're watching the recording, email us at fieldadvisor@ilsoy.org and we'll help you self-report. And the recording will be available soon on our YouTube channel. Again, thanks for tuning in. Hope everyone has a safe growing season, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.